BingX, a trusted global crypto exchange. Trade spot, futures, or copy top traders easily. Sign up via the link or referral code to get 30 USDT instantly, plus up to 1,500 USDT in bonuses for verification, deposit, and trading.
Cambio, the chant echoes under the intense sun on Florida Street. Buenos Aires, a vibrant pedestrian thoroughfare where a throng of money changers hawk US dollars. These arbolitos, or little trees, are a fixture in Argentina, especially as midterm elections on October 26 loom. A nation long accustomed to safeguarding its wealth in greenbacks. The best time to buy is now, advises one arbolito, preferring anonymity. It's a fake out. It'll rise again. This sentiment mirrors widespread economic expectations of a peso devaluation. Post-election, President Javier Milei's administration has imposed a cap on the currency, an attempt to curb triple-digit inflation. But this has left the peso overvalued, reserves depleted, and the Argentine economy in a state of stagnation, with consumers increasingly turning to cheaper imports. Luciano Galfione, a textile industrialist leading a 75-year-old family business, describes it as the worst moment in its history since the chainsaw-wielding Milei assumed office. Galfione has had to lay off nearly 50 workers and suspend another 45 at his Buenos Aires mill due to a sharp decline in consumption. Official figures from the Center for Argentine Political Economy, CEPA, paint a grim picture. Between December 2023 and July 2025, 18,000 businesses have shuttered, and 253,800 registered jobs have been lost, compounding this. Milei's government, unlike Donald Trump's approach, has reduced or eliminated tariffs, disadvantaging heavily taxed local industries against a flood of Chinese imports, making Argentina the most expensive country in South America. Galfione calls it the perfect storm, foreseeing no easy solution for Milei. If he devalues the currency, inflation will soar, he warns, noting that the only achievement so far is containing inflation, but at the steep price of a major recession. Alongside retirees protesting pension cuts outside Congress, Galfione represents those bearing the brunt of Argentina's embrace of Milei 2 years ago. Milei's populist experiment now stands at a critical juncture. Global leaders, from Donald Trump, who is attempting to shore up Milei and the peso with a substantial currency lifeline, to Italy's Giorgia Meloni, Hungary's Viktor Orban, and the UK's Nigel Farage, are observing closely as populist economic prescriptions collide with reality. Argentina, in particular, is a unique case, repeatedly battered by debt defaults and economic crises. Its voters have historically been receptive to both left-wing populism, exemplified by the Peronist movement, and now Milei's right-wing iteration. Milei embodies the classic populist figure, charismatic, iconoclastic, promising decisive action to reclaim economic control from entrenched elites for the benefit of the people. These traits are shared by allies like Trump and Farage, who cultivates an image as a people's champion despite his privileged background. Until recently, Milei's strategy, featuring extensive privatizations and drastic public spending cuts, had earned praise from the IMF for its role in bringing inflation under control, echoing the principles of his idol, Margaret Thatcher. However, financial markets have grown increasingly wary in recent months, rattled by a weak performance in provincial elections and a series of corruption scandals. It was only through massive financial intervention by Trump that a full-blown currency crisis was averted. Milei's struggles raise broader questions about the enduring appeal of charismatic populists who offer simplistic solutions to the intricate and fragmented global economy of today. Across Europe, the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis provided fertile ground for populists to gain traction. Ordinary citizens bore the brunt of economic rebuilding while banks received taxpayer bailouts. The COVID-19 pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine have only added to the turmoil, exacerbating stagnant living standards, characterized by sluggish wage growth and soaring prices, fueling a desire for change and a need for scapegoats. In France, President Emmanuel Macron is wary of calling snap elections, fearing his party could fall prey to the populist Marine Le Pen. With public dissatisfaction over austerity measures aimed at tackling the nation's deficit and appeasing bond markets at the heart of this political tension, Italian voters turned to the charismatic right-wing populist Giorgia Meloni in 2022. Meloni, a former minister and founder of the Brothers of Italy party, offered a radical right-wing alternative to the austerity policies of Mario Monti's technocratic government, while she has not adopted Milei's radical, tear-it-all-down economic approach. Quietly dropping calls for Italy to leave the euro, she has successfully tapped into voters' desire for a departure from the status quo, often blaming immigration for Italy's economic woes. In the UK, the appeal of Nigel Farage is readily understandable. According to Professor Ben Ansell of Oxford University, the answer is probably quite simple. People feel rotten about the economy and have done since the end of COVID or the start of the Ukraine war. They switched government. They still feel awful. They don't trust the main parties. So they turn to someone who says, everything needs to be disrupted. Trust me. The 2016 vote for Brexit, with its figurehead Boris Johnson, arguably followed a similar logic, brushing aside economic complexities with a bold assertion of the will of the people against establishment concerns. Farage, aside from calls for mass deportations that he later appeared to revise, has offered few concrete policies, expressing skepticism towards established institutions and proposing to rein in the Bank of England. His tax and spending policies remain fluid. Wary of a Liz Truss-style splurge, he recently abandoned a promise of significant tax cuts, with his Reform Party deputy indicating a focus on public spending cuts instead. The Labour Party hopes this stance will allow them to portray Farage as advocating a return to austerity, a point consistently made by Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Professor Joe Michel of the University of the West of England identifies contradictions in Farage's economic program, noting a tension between wealthy backers seeking tax cuts and deregulation, and his narrative resonating with working-class grievances over job losses and industrial decline. Farage entertains conversations with cryptocurrency entrepreneurs while also pledging to reopen shuttered steelworks and operate them on British coal. Michel warns that if a Farage government were to implement massive tax giveaways to the wealthy without a funding plan, it would be met with extreme market volatility, similar to the fallout from Truss's mini-budget. If it was tax cuts without spending cuts, the markets would puke, he states. Reform would face the same formidable challenge in winning over markets as governments across many developed economies currently do. Hefty public debts accumulated during the financial crisis and the COVID years, coupled with increased spending demands for defense and aging populations, have led to rising borrowing in numerous countries simultaneously, rendering bond markets unusually volatile and impacting interest rates. Despite these risks, much like the Brexit campaign, the effectiveness of a detailed rebuttal of Reform's economic policies remains uncertain. Reeves has acknowledged that Brexit has contributed to downgraded growth forecasts by the Office for Budget Responsibility, yet Labour has been hesitant to fully engage on this issue. Professor Ansell suggests that effectively challenging populist arguments requires adept political communication, with a lot of charisma, with humor. Economist Ann Pettifor concurs that the allure of economic populism is understandable, citing real anger about the wrongness of the system, which is structurally impoverishing the many and enriching the few. Her proposed counter to figures like Milei, Trump, and Farage is a left-wing populism, akin to that championed by figures such as Zoran Mamdani or Zach Polanski, which directly confronts the power of corporations, central banks, and the ultra-wealthy. Trump is saying, we should blame Mexico and Canada and China, Pettifor observes. The left should be saying the problem is Silicon Valley and Wall Street. Trump shares Milei's penchant for chaos and showmanship, but his economic approach doesn't neatly fit into his Argentinian ally's laissez-faire playbook. While Trump has enacted tax cuts for the wealthy and reduced regulations in certain sectors, his administration has also taken stakes in strategic firms and employed trade policy as a political weapon, a form of muscular interventionism more commonly associated with Beijing than Washington. Thus far, the impact of Trump's tariff blitz on the U.S. economy appears relatively muted, though this is potentially masked by the historic boom in AI investment, which an increasing number of experts warn could be a bubble. Many experts believe that Trump's attacks on the Federal Reserve and his blatant disregard for the rule of law may ultimately prove more corrosive to the long-term health of the U.S. economy than his erratic trade policies. In reality, the evidence suggests that neither left-wing nor right-wing populists tend to fare well when confronted with real-world economic challenges. Although each charismatic individual invariably claims to offer a unique solution, a recent study published in the American Economic Review analyzed the performance of 51 populist presidents and prime ministers between 1900 and 2020. It found that, on average, after 15 years, gross domestic product per capita tends to be 10% lower in countries governed by populist leaders, compared to similar economies under more mainstream administrations. The paper's authors, Manuel Funk, Moritz Schulerich, and Christoph Trebesch, argue that economic disintegration, decreasing macroeconomic stability, and the erosion of institutions typically go hand in hand with populist rule. An intriguing counterpoint from the research, however, is that despite the economic costs, these leaders often prove adept at retaining power, lasting an average of 8 years, compared to 4 years for their more moderate counterparts. This implies that even when their economic plans falter, populists do not necessarily face immediate electoral consequences. Their appeal extends beyond purely economic considerations, resonating with sentiments like the Brexit campaign's promise to take back control. Back in Buenos Aires, regardless of whether Milei's populist project collapses or is kept afloat by Trump, the citizens of Argentina have already borne a significant economic cost.